Hello and welcome to another MASH session, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Andrew Wilkie, Creative and Engagement Director at Touch Associates. How are you, Andrew?
Very good, Martin, and very nice to be here.
That's great to hear. Andrew, I was hoping maybe you could give us a bit of an introduction to yourself, really, and your role and experience.
I've been at Touch for about 2.5 years, and I'm relatively new to the whole live events industry. I spent the previous 20 years in the world of advertising at Saatchi, where essentially I did storytelling in a slightly different way. And that, I believe, is really my role at Touch, is to bring brand stories to life. And as a company that prides itself as being architects of engagement, we look to the story to engage the audience in an appropriate way to deliver client objectives.
That is really interesting. I mean, let's kind of look at the bigger picture. Agencies in particular have been hit hard in recent months. You know, that's a well-worn path, it goes without saying. Is now the time to reassess the business model and the offering, i.e., you know, moving more towards a digital and hybrid event concept?
Clearly, the industry has been hit enormously hard by the whole impact of COVID. Not anything that anyone could have predicted, and certainly not anything that anyone desired. In relation to that, I'm not sure that necessarily then the business model fundamentally has changed. What has changed is obviously the way that we service it. And clearly, the move from live events into hybrid has required a completely different kind of process of thinking in terms of the nature of engagement, the nature of delivery, and the nature of delivering messages on behalf of our clients.
I mean, it's never really been more important to be creative, I guess, in order to engage an online audience. I'm just curious, what challenges have the last few months sort of presented to you? I mean, you know, to actually create a proper experience in an online environment is not as easy as people think. You know, how you can't really recreate the live experience online, can you?
No, absolutely not. And clearly, the one element that we all miss as human beings is that direct person-to-person, individual to individual contact. And that whole nature of the social aspect of a live event is something that you simply can't easily recreate in the world of hybrid engagement. And that has meant a completely different way of approaching the nature of how we engage our audiences. You can't replicate and take the ingredients that you would expect from a live event and immediately translate that into a digital world. It doesn't work like that. Audiences respond in a very, very different way. Engagement needs to happen in a very, very different way. And we need to think about that in terms of the nature of how we answer the specifics of a client brief. That, I think, has been the biggest change. I think what we can't do is apply the same kind of methodology that one would to a live event and think that it simply translates into a digital space. It doesn't. We need to think about how we then make up for that loss of human interaction, the nature of what we produce or what we put in its place, to ensure that there is that degree of interest, impact, stimulation, etc., that you miss from the direct live engagement experience. That, I think, has been a big learning curve, which everyone is having to go through. Now, luckily enough for us, we had digital experience prior to that. We'd run an award-winning event 2 years previous. So that transition for us was probably easier than most. But for a lot of other agencies, that learning curve has been very, very steep. And, you know, full credit to the industry, because it's full of brilliantly creative people and they've had to adapt very, very quickly.
That they have indeed. They've really been kind of dropped in the deep end in some ways. You know, you could argue that, you know, the smart agencies would have had digital strategies and online products, I guess, on hand already. But I guess a lot of people underestimate what goes into it. You know, we're turned on by our sense of smell and things like that. And that sort of element is completely wiped out in an online environment. So you have to Rethink. Andrew, could you maybe tell us about a recent case study that you've been involved with, a digital experience or an engagement that you thought worked quite well?
Indeed. I think just to back up what I was saying earlier, we need to reapply thinking in terms of making it right for the environment that we now find ourselves in. And rather than thinking about day-long live events, clearly you can't ask people in their homes, in their bedrooms, whatever, to actually sit and look into and stare into a laptop for a day. We have to think about creating content in bite-sized chunks that engages with impact and interest that people can come back to. So to answer your question directly, what we did with a company day that we were running for a client was actually not to think about the nature of how we would recreate a live event, but to actually think of it in the context of a TV program. So effectively, we run an X Factor type of event whereby there was a day event where people were introduced into the cultures and behaviors in bite-sized chunks throughout the day, but in the evening to actually bring the talent of the organization to life, to do it in a way where people could actually engage still with their colleagues that they hadn't actually been able to interact with for a period of time, was to create a kind of X Factor show. So to think about a TV format rather than think about a traditional conference-based live event format is the way that I think we need to think about things. That translation of a creative idea from a live event environment into a virtual event environment requires creative thinking and repackaging to make sure that you're actually delivering against the needs of the audience and that they can actually engage with it, that they feel that they are part of the actual event rather than just being broadcasted to, if you can.
And that's a really good point, and that sort of brings me onto the next question, really, which is, do you think that COVID has brought about a sea change with regards to creative engagement? I personally don't think digital will replace live, but there surely must be a tangible way where the two will sit side by side to deliver the strongest experience.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There clearly isn't a like for like treatment here. It's not that. And I think we need to think about what we've learned from this crisis in a way, in terms of the way that we've had to pivot from live to virtual to digital. How do we use that learning and not lose it in terms of what we've garnered? I think the key thing about the virtual world is we're not limited by the four walls or space of the live event architecture of a hotel, of a conference room. The key thing about engagement in the virtual world is that you are limited only by your imagination. You have an opportunity to create an environment that does justice to the narrative that you're trying to communicate on behalf of your clients. So if you're in a business that prides itself on running a network, set the event inside the network. Talk about the subject matter from inside the subject matter, and use creativity to enhance the story that you're telling, so that the message becomes impactful, interesting in a different way. Now, that kind of skill set can equally be translated to the live event. How do we create an environment that actually allows the story and the narrative to live and breathe? And that's a really important thing that I think we can bring to the nature of the live event experience, which clearly is still a way off. The world of virtual will hopefully relatively soon become the world of hybrid. And there are all sorts of questions that we need to ask ourselves there from a creative perspective. How do we make sure that those people who are actually participating in the event live have got a similar experience to those people who are experiencing it virtually? We have to recognize that those two experiences are going to be different. How do we make sure that there is a narrative that is equally impactful, equally interesting to both? All of those areas of questioning are going to be vital in terms of creative development and engagement, and how do we actually make sure that the new world learns from the old, and that we can actually get the best bits of both. And I think that's the key thing in terms of going forward.
I think you're absolutely spot on. So finally, Andrew, I'm going to ask really, what's your message to event buyers at this time in the context of staying engaged with their audiences? Because it's not just the events industry or experience industry that's suffering right now. Brands across all sectors are in a terrible position right now, and in interacting and staying engaged with an audience has never been more important. Have you any inspiring words for them?
I think the key thing is approach everything with a degree of optimism. It is very easy for us to get down about the fact that the live event situation is not going to come back as quickly as we would like. I think there needs to be an appreciation that, as we have said, that we are dealing with a different medium. We're dealing with engagement in a different way, and we've got to appreciate the nuance there. But there's an awful lot that can be brought to bear, and creativity is going to be absolutely key, because, as you and I both know, the nature of the word Zoom fatigue has been one of those phrases that everyone's got overly familiar with. We've got to make sure that we break down that fatigue, and the way we do that is to think about a creative approach, a more creative approach. Think about using technology in imaginative ways, so that actually we're not always defaulting to what we believe to be second best, but we use and harness the opportunity that we've got from talking and engaging in a slightly different way, and appreciate that actually, narratives can be told in an engaging way, and engaging in a different way could make it just as interesting as the live event had been previously.
Andrew, you're a busy man. I am in no doubt at all. Thank you so much for stopping by to chat to us. We'll speak to you later.